Well, hello and welcome to Ground Level's Wednesday Wisdom. We're delighted to have you with us again today, joining us for this session. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ben. And we're going to be talking to Ben about being back in the room, some technical things to keep in mind and to bear in mind as you're starting to think about going back into your church buildings, and maybe thinking about the hybrid approach as well of being back in the room and having a congregation in the room, but also streaming your service to an online audience as well, and the different ways that you can do this. So Ben, why don't you start off by just telling us a bit about who you are and what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So yeah, as you say, my name's Ben. I run my own audio-visual company. So I run a company called Plugged In Audio Visual, and I work with churches across the UK to do church tech, anything kind of technical relating to churches. And I've also helped Ground Level on a number of occasions with one events and leaders conferences and all those sorts of things as well. So any kind of tech related churchy stuff, I'm generally involved in most of that.
That's great. So Ben, a lot of churches are currently kind of going back to or planning for in-person services and considering keeping their online stream going at the same time. What are some of the different approaches to how you can do that?
So I see this as a sliding scale, effectively, of at the one end, we have purely online content. So it will be probably a pre-recorded service, something that's put together in advance and then just posted online and is only ever viewed online. It won't go out in person. And then at the other end of the scale, we have a purely in-person service. So something that happens in the building, doesn't go out online at all, and is just for people in the building. And effectively, we have a sliding scale between those two things of any number of possibilities of what can be done. So we can go from just a purely in-person service to then putting cameras on that and live streaming just what happens in the building, through to somewhere in the middle that will be perhaps a bit more interactive. And maybe in a minute we can look at perhaps some of the ideas of what that might look like. And then all the way through to, as I say, just kind of purely online with no in-person element at all. And there's this sliding scale with almost endless possibilities in the middle as to what that might look like.
Great. So what would you say are some of the kind of advantages and disadvantages of some of those?
So one of the things that I think is probably fairly negative is to do an in-person service and then just put a camera on it and point a camera on the stage and just broadcast what happens on the stage. It's a fairly uninteresting way for somebody online to engage with that. Now, I would probably start off actually by saying we need to ask the question, why are we doing an online service? Because I think if you can answer that question, first of all, we can probably then get a better understanding of how far along this sliding scale we need to go. So for example, if the reason why you're going online in the first place is because you just want to make yourself available to people who would otherwise be in the building, but for whatever reason at the minute can't be, and all we want to do is just show them what's been going on in the service, that's about the only time where I'd say it's acceptable just to point a camera at what's going on and show what's going on. Those people will be familiar with what happens in the building, they're familiar with the people, and they're quite happy just to watch what's going on in the building without too much interaction going on. However, a lot of churches are seeing online as a way to engage with new people, people who wouldn't come to the building, people who wouldn't ever kind of turn up on a Sunday morning, but they now want to try and engage with new people, new parts of the community, possibly even different parts of the world as well, but just reaching out to other people who wouldn't normally be on the building. And if that's the case, I think you need to be doing a bit more than just simply pointing a camera and shooting at what's happening. As I say, it's not very interactive, it's not very engaging for people online, it's just, this is what's happening. And obviously at the other end of the scale, the downside of that is you're effectively duplicating the amount of work you want to do, because if you're going to do something that only exists online and doesn't happen in the building, well, then you're still going to need to put on a service in the building for the people who can attend and who want to attend. So you'll have one service that's just online and one service that's just on the building. That's twice the amount of work that you've got to do. So pros and cons to both ends of that. Probably, I think what will happen is most churches will end up somewhere in the middle as a compromise between those two positions.
Yeah. So I think bearing in mind what you want to achieve and who you want to who the audience is, who the kind of congregation on the end of that is really important, isn't it? In terms of shaping what those things look like and kind of where on the scale you find yourself. So I think it is quite important for churches to really have kind of a strategy for their online content, isn't it? And think about, who is that for and where is that going, and who do they want that to reach, and therefore what the best approach is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. As I say, I would always say start with the why. Ask yourself why. Why are we doing this? And that will just really help you in your mind to kind of form that strategy and just to work out what is the purpose, what is the goal, what do we want to achieve by doing this, and then build your strategy around that. Because, like you say, you could end up just throwing. You can potentially even end up throwing money, buying new equipment. That actually isn't going to achieve anything because you don't actually know what it is that you want to achieve. So you need to start off by working that strategy out, work that plan out, ask yourself why.
That's great. And I'm sure a lot of churches at the moment are kind of thinking about the restrictions that might be changing in England soon. What changes do you think will have kind of the most effect on what our services look like, both physically and in the room? Maybe when we think about, people starting to sing again or more people, like what are some of the things we need to bear in mind when some of those things changed, how it impacts our content?
Yeah, so I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There are two key things that I think are going to have the biggest impact from a technical point of view, and that's going to be singing, congregations allowed to sing again, and just physically more bodies in the room. So the two, let's start off with the more bodies thing. There are a few things that are going to impact on what we do from that. First of all, a positive. One of the things that's been problematic for a number of people is having a big empty church building makes the space very echoey. And when people have been trying to do filming and things in a building with no other people in there, it can make the space sound very empty, very echoey. And just putting bodies back in the building again is going to help to absorb a lot of that sound, and it's going to help to just help that control that sound a lot more. But do be aware with that over the last year, 18 months, however long you've been doing this for, you will find that you will have set things like EQ settings and things on your microphones that you might well find change when you get more people back in the building again. The sound is going to sound different when you've got people in the room. So settings that you've had over the last year that you've worked on, that you've tweaked and adjusted, might now need to be tweaked and adjusted again to accommodate for the congregation being in the room. The other thing I'd also say with more bodies in the room is I think one of the most important things for churches to capture, and so often is missed, is video footage of the congregation in the room. I think one of the things that's so special and so important about the church is that it is a gathered body of people. The church isn't the building. I think we've been very clear on that over the last year as churches have not been able to use their buildings. That isn't the church. The church isn't the building, it is the people. And I think as we get the people back in the building again, we need to put that on the camera. We need to be able to show that we are a church, and that means we are a collected group of people who are coming together. And so to have camera shots that actually show that and include that, I think is a very important thing to do. Now, there are some things to bear in mind with that. So do be careful of things like safeguarding. If you have children, for example, in your church who can't be put on the internet for whatever reason, you need to be really careful about where you position those cameras and how you capture those shots. So maybe think about having cameras perhaps to one side of the room that only captures one side of the room, and make sure you say to people, look, our cameras are pointing here. If you can't be on camera, then don't go into this space. And make sure you have areas that are clearly designated as no camera zones. And if there are children or anybody who can't be put on the internet for whatever reason, make sure they're aware of where those spaces are. And also things like GDPR as well, and just be careful about who you're capturing and what you're capturing, and just be very conscious as to exactly what's going on. Another example might be kind of personal prayer responses. If there's somebody who's having some sort of personal time of prayer, just be very aware of that when you're putting those sorts of things on camera. But with those things aside, as much as you can, I would really encourage you to try and get shots of the congregation. And then just briefly on singing, again, very similar kind of line, really. I would say you really want to try and capture the singing of the congregation. Again, I think that's a very important part of what we do as a church. Again, the gathered body coming together, singing together, I think is a very important thing. And so make sure that you've got microphones in your room that can pick up the sound of that singing. Just very quickly, there are two types of microphones that I would suggest you have a look at for picking up the singing of a congregation, and they are what's called a shotgun mic and a large diaphragm condenser microphone. This here is a large diaphragm condenser microphone. It will look something along these kind of lines, and a shotgun mic is actually what I'm using just up here for capturing my sound right now. And in very simple terms, the way that you can think about these two microphones is this is perhaps what you might think of as a wide angled microphone. So this will pick up quite a wide area, but not from a very great distance. So it's sort of short but wide that this will pick up. These microphones, on the other hand, will pick up narrow, but from a much further distance. So they're short, narrower, but longer. Now, the very best thing you can do is to use a combination of both of these two things. And I would have perhaps sort of two of these, one either side, and then two of these, one either side. And that will give you a really nice mixture of those sounds. If budgets don't allow for that, or whatever, you can't do that for whatever reason, then maybe just a couple of shotguns might be the place to start with. But look at this kind of combination of microphones to pick up the sound with your congregation.
That's really helpful, Ben. I'll let you put your microphones away. So what about kind of not forgetting about our online audience? What are some of the ways that we can still kind of engage and include our online congregation? You know, the people that are in the room but not in the room. What are some of the kind of hints and tips that you'd give on that?
Yeah, okay. So I mentioned at the beginning, I think one of the worst things you can do in most situations, you can get away with it in some situations, but most of the time, I think one of the worst things you can do is have an in-person service and just point cameras at it. One of the ways that I sort of perhaps think about this is to say, well, if we imagine we have 3 people and we say to them, well, there's 2 of them that are having a conversation together. Do we say to that third person, well, you can just sit there and watch us having our conversation? Or do we say to that third person, come and join us and be a part of this conversation with us? And that's the way I think you can sort of look at this sometimes. So I think if you have a service that's going on and all you're doing is pointing a camera at it and just showing that to the people online, what effectively is you're saying is we're having the service over here and you can just sit there and watch it. And it doesn't really kind of bring them into that. It doesn't sort of make them a part of what's going on. So I think what I would suggest is just remember the cameras, remember the people at home, perhaps think not just that I'm talking to a camera, but think I'm talking to the person who's behind the camera. Maybe even bring to mind some of the people that you will know will be at home, who will be sat there watching this on the camera, and just think, you know, if there's a question that you ask the congregation, ask it to the camera as well, and just say, if you're at home right now, why don't you type this in the chat box, or why don't you put this emoji up on the screen to show your participation in whatever it is that I'm saying right now. And just think of ways like that that you can engage those people at home, bring them into that conversation. Don't just have the conversation here and say you can sit there and kind of watch us talking. Be a part of this, come and join in with this. And if you can engage them and draw them in, that's going to make it a lot more attractive. If you want to use this as a form of outreach, that's going to be much more engaging for people at home. And for the members of the congregation as well, if they're already part of your church, it just brings them into it. It just makes them feel a part of what's going on. So avoid as much as possible just pointing your camera at what's going on in the room. Try to engage with people as well.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you, Ben. That's some great wisdom. And finally, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do as kind of plugged in audiovisual and as Ben himself to support churches?
Yeah, so as I say, audiovisual company specifically working with churches. So a number of churches, certainly throughout ground level, but actually beyond ground level, who we've been able to support over the last several years. And that can be in a number of ways. So if you're looking for equipment for doing any of this online stuff, then please do get in touch. I'm more than happy to help out with those sorts of things. For content, if you need help putting together any kind of content, videos and those sorts of things, I can help with that. But one of the big things that I've done a lot of work on over the last year is training and supporting people through training in new skills to be able to do online church. And so I've really invested quite a lot recently in a YouTube channel. I'll just put an image up here for you. So my YouTube channel is available for free. Obviously, go and view any of the videos on there, and I try to deliver helpful teaching and training on how to do online church there. So just search for Plugged In Audio Visual on YouTube, or go to youtube.com/pluggedinav, and you will be able to find lots of training videos and things. I put up weekly videos on there. So there's a new video going out every week on there as to how to do sort of online church stuff better. And then the other form of training that I've also developed is I put together a development program to work with churches. And I'm now working with a number of churches over the course of, normally it's over the course of a year, 12 months. And I will, over the course of that period, meet with those churches, perhaps once a month or once every other month, and just come together and we will look at a particular skill. Perhaps it might be sound. How can we improve your sound in what you're doing? And then we come back the following session and say, okay, so what did we put in place last time? Has it worked? Has it helped? How can we improve even further? And then maybe look at video or lighting or something else. And we'll just go through over the course of the year, developing these skills, building up the team, and equipping people to be able to do online church more effectively in your situation, wherever you are, whatever you're trying to do.
That's great. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Ben. And thank you everyone for joining us for this week's Wednesday Wisdom. I hope that's been helpful and some great things to think about as you prepare to go back in the room, or if you're already in the room, for involving your online congregation. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.